Good morning, everybody. Somebody turn me on or I'm going to have to yell. There we go. I'm in Luke chapter 5. I'll invite you to join me in Luke chapter 5 this morning as we continue our study through the Gospel of Luke. Luke chapter 5. Have several unexpected faces with us in the crowd today. Nick, you are not one of them. I expect you to be here, right there actually, every Sunday. Got George and Kelly with us this morning. Really glad to see them. Miss having him right here in my spit zone, you know. Glad they're here with us. Luke chapter 5. I want to remind you of the lens through which we're studying the Gospel of Luke. We're really considering it through the lens of what Luke says in Luke chapter 1 and verse number 4. He's writing to Theophilus, and he says he's writing these things that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. We're trying to gain certainty about Jesus, and that's what Luke is trying to help convince us of. He's trying to present us with information so that we can be confident, not just in the facts about Jesus, but in who he claimed to be and what he demonstrated and what he did while he was here. And so I was thinking about that. You know, every week I just kind of ponder, how can I gain better certainty from what Luke is giving me? And I realized a good question to ask each week as I'm reading through the gospel is, what have I been taught about Jesus? What is it that I have been led to believe about Jesus Christ? Because we need to think about those considerations. And one of the things, like we talked about on Wednesday, is that Jesus lived a sinless life, for instance, right? And in Luke chapter 4, that's one of the things that Luke addresses very plainly. Jesus lived sinlessly. And so we need to be asking ourselves this question: what have I been taught about Jesus? And how does what Luke is presenting to me help me have confidence and certainty that these things are actually true about Jesus Christ? And so what we're doing really is solidifying what we know about Jesus, what we believe about who he was, what he taught, what was important to him, ultimately what he accomplished, and how he handled all of these people and situations that he came in contact with. But ultimately, I think one of the things that we need to be considering too is how Jesus got from this place of fame, where people were excited about him, to this place where he goes to the cross and he was killed. And I think we get our first glimpse into that in our chapter for today here in Luke chapter 5. Now, to kind of get us some momentum going into Luke chapter 5, Luke has made it very clear that these reports about Jesus are starting to spread, right? People are starting to hear about Jesus. They're starting to see some of the things that he's doing. There's some power in the words that he's saying, and that's going to be an emphatic point today in our study. The power of Jesus' words and how people recognize the authority that it carries with it. But crowds are starting to flock to Jesus, and so are the religious leaders. They're noticing, and you'll see in our section for today, Luke highlights both the crowds and the religious leaders and how they are coming to Jesus with questions, concerns, skepticism even. But I want to point that out because immediately Luke is pointing to the fact that Jesus is not operating in a corner. Right? He's not doing things behind closed doors. He's not behaving in ways that are not verifiable. We've talked about this nearly every class, but I think it's important to continue to point out. These reports that are being spread, many people saw Jesus. They could verify the things that were being said about Jesus. They're coming to see Jesus for themselves. And there's excitement, right? But also some people have reservations. Can we really trust what this guy is selling? And so the emphatic point of this section is really what Jesus stated in Luke chapter 4 and verse number 43. People are coming to Jesus to have him work more miracles, to heal the sick. And you remember what Jesus says? I can't stay here, right? I've got to keep going. I've got to preach this good news of the kingdom because that's why I'm here. His mission was to let people know there is this kingdom that is here with power. And by the way, I'm the king. I'm the one that you've been looking for. And the emphatic point is on his words. Look back to Luke chapter 4 and verse number 32. I see this as kind of a summarizing statement that we see played out time and time and time again here over the next few chapters. Luke chapter 4 and verse number 32. And they were astonished at his teaching, for his word possessed authority. And we're going to see that here in Luke chapter 5 today, where it says here on one occasion, verse number 1, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake and he's teaching them. Again, in Luke chapter 5 and verse number 5, Simon, after Jesus gives him this instruction, he says, we fished all night, we caught no fishes, but at your word, I will let down the nets. There's something about the way Jesus spoke, the words that he used, that people looked at that and they said, wow, there's something powerful here. There's something powerful here that we need to pay attention to that is worth me obeying even. That's what we get, I think, from the story of Peter. And so I want you also to notice, though, that Jesus' work is comprehensive. His message is comprehensive. And what I mean by that is he's not just claiming things. He's also demonstrating that power, right? And I think that's very clearly demonstrated, as we'll see here in chapter 5 and verse number 23, when he says, man, your sins are forgiven. You guys remember this episode? And they're starting to question, who can forgive sins but God alone? And Jesus says, I know I can't just claim this, so that you'll know that the Son of Man has power, and he heals the man, right? So he works a miracle to demonstrate his power. So Jesus is working together his claims and his power to demonstrate the authority. And this is what gives us certainty concerning what we've been taught about Jesus. He practiced what he preached, not for the sake of being different, but to demonstrate his authority and to demonstrate his power. Now let's jump into the text here. That's a bit of a kind of an opening introductory thoughts. Many people are starting to realize these things about Jesus. Many are coming to see because of the report. And as chapter 5 opens, there's this emphasis on the crowds. And we're going to see this emphasis on the crowds throughout chapter 5. Verse number 1, we already read this. They're pressing in on him. Verse number 15, they're gathering to hear him and to be healed. And because of what Jesus is doing, access is becoming more and more limited to him. You look at chapter 5 and verse number 19. He's teaching, and these guys want to bring their lame friend to Jesus to be healed, and they have no way to get to Jesus except lower him through the roof. I mean, access to Jesus is becoming more and more limited because of the power of his words, right? And we would expect this, right? Because men of power tend to become less and less accessible. Would you agree with me on that? That's kind of how things work. You can't just walk up to the President of the United States and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something that's on my heart, right? Because men of power, they tend to be guarded, right? They tend to be less accessible. In fact, the people that were around Jesus felt this way about him. There were times when people were getting too close and they'd be like, y'all need to go away. We need time with Jesus by ourselves. You remember when he fed the masses and they said, you crowds get out of here. We want to spend time with Jesus alone. But you remember how Jesus responded to that? He said, no, this is why I'm here. I'm actually here to be with the people. Jesus wasn't having it. He wasn't just about having the crowds. Jesus wanted to have real interactions with people. And I want you to notice how Jesus kind of dealt with all of this. You look in chapter 5 and verse number 1. So these crowds are pressing in on him. And he's like, I've got to teach. And so what does he do in order to teach? He gets in the boat. He makes a little bit of space. He says, I need to teach people. And I need to be accessible to people. I want you to notice also, as we'll see in our chapter for today, he paused for these personal conversations with people. Have you realized that? These crowds are pressing in on him, and yet Jesus will turn and he'll say, Simon, I want to talk to you. Or he'll look at this man with leprosy. When the crowds are pressing in on him, he say, I want to talk to you. He stopped everything to acknowledge people, individuals. For him, it wasn't just about how many people can I get together. It was a very personal message that Jesus brought to everyone. And so I think Luke in his gospel, especially in this chapter, wants to show us that the gospel is for everyone by showing us that Jesus is accessible. Jesus is accessible to everyone. Even in the midst of all the crowds, Jesus is accessible to everyone. All right, so let's jump into the text now. So when Jesus gets into the boat, here at the beginning of chapter 5, the crowds are pressing in to hear the word of God, right? Again, that's Jesus' purpose. They weren't just simply there for healing. And so he gets into this somewhat random boat. Let's read a couple of these verses here. On one occasion, verse number 1 of chapter 5, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. And getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. And so Jesus begins to teach, but Luke here doesn't expound on what Jesus teaches because he's more concerned about his interaction with Simon Peter. And so you notice beginning in verse number 4, and when he had finished speaking, he turns to Simon. He said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." I want you to note a couple of important details, I think, here that kind of guide Jesus' interaction with Simon. So he's already told Simon in verse number 3 at the end of the verse, or the middle of the verse, he gets in his boat, he says, "Put out a little bit from the land." So he's already asked Simon to do something that's a bit of an imposition, because what's Simon been doing all night? He's been fishing. He's been working, right? And what we're going to learn a bit later is he's a little bit tired, right? We fished all night and caught nothing. But Jesus gets in the boat and he listens to Jesus. Why do you think he's listening to Jesus? Why do you think he allows Jesus this imposition in his life? He obviously has some level of trust in Jesus. And I realize I'm reading in between the lines here a little bit, but I think this is what drives this whole scenario, Simon's response especially. But I want you to notice, Jesus tells him to put out a little bit from the land, but then when he turns to him in verse number 4, he says, "Put out a little bit farther. Put out into the deep." Do you see a progression here of Jesus with Peter? It's very subtle, but it's almost the same phrase. Put out a little bit from the land. Now put out a little bit deeper, Simon. Jesus is asking Peter to trust him little by little. He's meeting Peter where he's at. And I think it's important to see that because the way that Jesus works with Simon is the same way Jesus works with people today, right? Come a little bit farther with me. Trust me a little bit more. If you trust my words, keep trusting me. And so he tells him to do this, and he tells Simon, he says, "Let down your nets." Let's see, verse number 4, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." Now, no big deal, right? He's a fisherman, except what's the issue here? Why might Peter take offense to what Jesus is saying to him? He's fished all night and caught no fishes. Yeah. And they've already cleaned the nets. Hey, we're done for the day, Jesus. And by the way, there's nothing out here. If there was, we would have caught something by now, right? Here are professional fishermen who are getting fishing advice from a carpenter's son, right? I don't know about you, I'm not listening to that guy, right? And Peter has a comment to him. He says, verse number 5, "Master, we toiled all night and we took nothing. We're tired. This doesn't make any sense." But then what does Simon Peter say? How does he follow that up? Yeah, notice what he says, "At your word, I will." There's something about Jesus' words that are so powerful to Simon that even though it doesn't make any sense, even though he is tired, he says, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it." He had seen enough about Jesus to know, I think I can trust this guy. "Come out into the deep with me," Jesus says. Let me tell you, just a quick sidebar. I think this is an important lesson about doing things out of obedience, even when they don't make sense, because we trust Jesus. My question would be, just do we trust Jesus this much? Do we trust him enough to say, yeah, that doesn't really make sense in my life, or I've tried this before. I've been trying this all night, and it doesn't work. But I'm going to try one more time because you told me to. There's something about obeying Jesus because we trust him. And that's where we find the real power from Jesus. And when Peter obeyed Jesus, what happened?
He caught so many fish the next day.
Yeah. It completely changes his life circumstance. You think about this. He's a professional fisherman. To catch enough fish to make your boat sink, that's a lot of fish. To catch enough fish for 2 boats to sink, that's got to be life-changing, right? For these fishermen. And this would be great for business. I mean, if I'm a professional fisherman, what are maybe the first things I'm thinking about? Hey, we need to hire this guy as a consultant, right? Maybe someone would look at Jesus and say, wow, I need this guy around for some sort of personal gain, right? How does Peter respond to what Jesus does for him? There's a very profound response from Peter that I think we need to settle our attention on. Instead of saying, wow, look at what he's done for me. Look at how much I can gain from this. Look at how life-changing this is. His first response is to fall to his knees in front of Jesus and say, I need you to leave. I want you to think about that. Why does Peter say, depart from me? I'm a sinful man. Why do you think that's Peter's response? He doesn't think he's worthy. Why does he come to this conclusion? Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just thinking Isaiah had the same response.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because when people have divine encounters, this is usually what it looks like, right? I'm thinking about Isaiah in the throne room, Isaiah chapter 6. I'm thinking about Exodus chapter 20 when Israel saw God on the mountain, right? Anytime that people had an encounter with the one true and living God, it often ended up like this, right? There's something that Peter is realizing here, isn't there? He's realizing Jesus is more than just a good teacher. He's more than just a messenger from God. It seems to me, especially by Peter's response, he realizes Jesus is actually God, and I'm sinful. And him hanging around is not good for me. I am a sinful man. And it's interesting. Peter exhibits the same response that others who saw divinity had. You think about what we've already seen in the Gospel of Luke. When Zechariah encountered the angel, when Mary was confronted with the angel, what was their response? Fear. Fear. Listen, to see God clearly ought to produce some sort of guttural response of, I am unworthy to be in the presence of this person. And I understand there's a proper balance we've got to take in all of this. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And understanding God's power and understanding how that is transferred and translated into the person of Jesus is important for us today, because Jesus is not just our buddy for us to walk up and say, yeah, I hang out with Jesus, he's my friend. To understand Jesus properly is to be like Peter and say, this is somebody that I should be afraid of. I need to appreciate his power and his position and his ability. If someone can command even these most random of life circumstances, because you think about it, listen, I go fishing sometimes, and yeah, we got a lot of cool technology today, but there's nobody in this world that can say, yeah, just put down your nets and all, it's going to be full of fish. Like, you just can't do that. You can't do what Jesus did and control natural occurrences. It's impossible. And for somebody to be able to do that should make you go, wait a second. Who is this person? In fact, that's what they're going to say whenever he calms the wind and the sea. What kind of person is this? We need to see and ask that question. What kind of person is this Jesus that we are claiming to follow? And do we recognize the great disparity? Yes, he's very relatable to us, and Luke is trying to make that point to us. Jesus is completely relatable to us, but he's also God. And he's also powerful, and he also has authority, and we need to appreciate and respect that. Like Peter, depart from me, I'm a sinful man. Danny, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wonder how many times Peter caught that many fish before. Would that have produced faith?
Yeah, I don't know. My guess is this has probably never happened to them before, because their response to this is so profound. It says they didn't even think twice about this. They get back to the land, and what do?
Leave it all.
They leave everything. They were like, we found somebody who he can supply any need that we have, and he's worth leaving everything behind for him. George?
I think we have to conclude that, because if he had caught that many fish before, then it would raise the question, was this a miracle or not?
Sure.
I think Jesus' miracles always had garnered the response of amazement.
That's right.
This has never happened.
Well, and that's what you see here. to your point, we've seen this time and again in the Gospel of Luke. When people see the work of Jesus and they hear the words of Jesus and the power of Jesus, it's not just like, okay, that's worth thinking about. It's nobody talks like this. Nobody does these kinds of things. There is something different about Jesus. Do we feel that way about Jesus? You know, I was talking to a guy yesterday at the coffee shop, Friday rather, and I just asked him what he believed about Jesus, and he was like, oh, you know, God is among us, and he worked through Jesus, and he worked through this guy. And I said, you can't look at Jesus like that. He doesn't give us that option to just say he's just another good moral teacher. Jesus behaved and talked in such a way that he said, you either buy me whole hog or I'm out. And that's the way the Gospels present him. He's not like anyone else. Even the most religious people of the day, when they came in contact with Jesus, they said, nobody's like him. He is so completely different. He speaks differently than the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious leaders. He speaks like he wrote the book, not like he just memorized the whole thing, right? He knows this stuff, but he's speaking very differently. No?
I think part of what was amazing about this and of all his wonders and signs and miracles, it's instantaneous.
Sure.
You can see a little contrast. We fished here all night.
That's right.
Nothing. All of a sudden, let the nets down. I imagine it was immediate that the fish were in the nets.
Yeah.
And that's got to be amazing because fishermen usually don't catch fish just like that.
Yeah.
They have to drag their nets to get the fish they want. It doesn't say they did that. It was something that happened immediately.
Yeah.
And that's true with all the healings. People get up and walk away immediately.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, that's something that I noticed this time as I was reading the Gospel of Luke is in the next episode where he cleanses the leper, and the next episode after that where he heals the paralytic, he just speaks it, and it's so reminiscent of Genesis chapter 1 when God's creating. God said it, and it was so. And the same thing is happening with Jesus. He says it, and it's immediately so. His words carry power. And this is something I want to emphasize as often as I can. There is such power in one interaction with Jesus, in trusting in His Word in our life that has immediate impact on our life. We never need to underestimate or undervalue the power of Jesus' words in its simplest expressions. Because all He had to say to these people is, drop your nets, and they catch fish. You are clean, and he's cleansed of leprosy. Stand up and walk. And it was so. There's something powerful about what Jesus can do to the body physically, but more importantly, to the spiritual person, to our soul. He has the ability to change us from the moment we hear his words. You guys buying that? Do we live like that, though? Do we value the words of Jesus so much that we recognize one interaction with Jesus can completely change our life? It can completely change the lives of other people. It completely changed the life of Peter and James and John. From now on, they're no longer fishermen. What are they? They're fishers of men. You know what's interesting, too, is how Jesus calls them. You know, in other episodes of the Gospels, when it talks about how Jesus calls Peter, it documents him coming up to them and saying, follow me. But here, it shows us how Jesus called them. And didn't he do it in such a relatable way? Here are men who are professional fishermen, and he gives them this object lesson of, yeah, I can make you catch whatever. No big deal. He said, but what does he say to them? He looks at them, and he says, from now on, you will be fishers of men. This is the end of verse number 10. Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. The way he calls them was a way that made perfect sense to them. I get it. If Jesus can do this, he can do anything in my life. Miss Ruth, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just noticed that as they caught so many fish, and then they were going to be fishers of men, their business and their family was left. But Jesus provided, because with all those fish, the business was taken care of, the family would have provisions so that
Sure.
they didn't have to be concerned because they were well taken care of.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had not considered that. Jesus provided exactly what they needed. Kind of reminiscent of Matthew chapter 5, or Matthew 6, don't worry about your life, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. He provides exactly what you need. Come and follow me. Yeah, great thought. Yeah, John?
Yeah, sometimes it's the things that aren't said that make me wonder, how did Zebedee and Mrs. Zebedee and the other Zebedee feel about,
Sure.
them dropping everything and following Jesus? I wonder if it had the same effect on them, if they became believers or, if they were troubled by it. We don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I'm thinking about now in the later episode when Mrs. Zebedee is encouraging her sons to go prod Jesus for these positions of power. They obviously realize this guy's somebody special. In fact, it seems like they realize he's the Messiah, and I want my son sitting next to the Messiah. I mean, he's already called them. Why not go ahead and ask for the rest of it too? It obviously changed something in their heart, or at least solidified in their heart. This guy is who we thought he was. This guy's exactly who we thought he was. Miss Linda?
I think it's important not to gloss over the first part of that statement.
Okay.
Do not be afraid.
Do not be afraid. I think you're exactly right. It's interesting. That's the same response that when Zechariah saw the angel and Mary saw the angel, it's the same response. They had fear. They said, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. Why do you think that's the response of Jesus to Peter?
Peter says, depart from me, I'm a sinful man. He's obviously feeling unworthy of Jesus' presence, even. And so if he tells him, don't be afraid, I'm here for you.
That's right. There's something about that statement where Jesus is communicating yes, I have this power, and yes, I'm wielding it for your good. So if you understand that, there's something very profound about that we all need desperately, right? We all need that kind of confidence. George?
I think it's worth noting, too, that it's going to be God's word that catches men, right? And it makes
That's
me
exactly
think about
right.
the verse in 2 Corinthians 4, where he says, where Paul is saying, for it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness. That word, let there be light, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. So, and it's still, you're going to go catch men, but you're going to be taking my word.
That's right.
It's my word.
Yeah, great point. This all comes back to Jesus' mission. I'm sharing the good news of the kingdom. This is a manifestation of that. But my word, the message about my kingdom is exactly what people need. You're exactly right. And Jesus is coupling those two things together. Yeah, good thought. Ryan?
So this chapter has a lot to say about action upon faith.
Sure.
Almost every single story that shows up here has people dealing with faith and Jesus calling them to do something about it. Even to the point later on with the Pharisees showing up and them saying, acknowledging, we see this stuff, but we're not willing to do anything about it. And grumbling about people who are doing something about it.
That's interesting.
It ties in that most important statement, the word that shows up in verse 10. It's from now on, you will be doing these things. I'm equipping you to do these actions of what I'm doing. Your faith is great. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that's a great point. And we'll really start to see that contrast when the Pharisees and the teachers of the law show up and they start observing these things as well, in contrast to these people who are just honestly looking at this saying, this means something, right? That's kind of how we're supposed to read this, isn't it? Jesus isn't just putting on a show so that people can be entertained. It means something. If someone speaks with such authority and then backs it up, that means something. We ought to respond to that in some way other than just like, hey, that's neat. Now, Jesus has some greater expectation for that. That's a great thought. Any other thoughts on this section? And we kind of sat on this one for a while, didn't we? This is a good interaction, though. I think it's one that we can really relate to. Again, just appreciating the power of Jesus' words and how it impacts our obedience. And if we just trust Him, it changes our life. It changes our life. So after this, we're given a couple episodes of healing that really emphasize the greatness of Jesus over these normal life circumstances. The first is one of a leper. So he's got this man who comes to him, which I think just reading this straight through, we sometimes miss the fact that here's a man who was, because of his leprosy, not allowed to live inside the city, right? And yet here he has come into the city. He's ventured somewhere where he shouldn't be as it is, according to Jewish law. And he's found himself at the feet of Jesus, and he throws himself down. I just imagine as people are watching this, they are horrified. What is going on? Who let this leper in the city, right? And yet here's this man with the knowledge of his condition, knowledge of what the law said, so desperate that he says, I've got to get to Jesus. And he just throws himself down because he is convinced. I want you to notice, beginning in verse number 12, while Jesus was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. So what does this tell us this man believed about Jesus? Just from that one statement. He has the ability. Now I want you to think about this. People that had leprosy, there was no cure for leprosy. They had to go outside the city until an act of God happened and they got better. Right? There was nothing you could do about it. I've searched through the law, thought for sure God gave them some sort of remedy, right, to get to this place of cleansing. You couldn't be cleansed from leprosy. You had to wait it out. And sometimes you were cleansed and sometimes you weren't. Obviously, this man had a more severe form of leprosy because it says he was full of leprosy. But he has no ability to cleanse himself. There's nothing he can do. All he can do is wait it out. And if by some act of God he becomes cleansed of his leprosy, then the law says, then you go to the priest, you offer this sacrifice, you do this. And so here's a man with no ability, and yet he comes to Jesus, and what does he ask Jesus to do? Cleanse me. Cleanse me. What does that mean he believed about Jesus? He had the power to change his circumstances. He wasn't just looking at Jesus as someone who could pronounce him clean. He is someone that could make him clean. But you notice he also recognizes something profound, and that is that he's subject to the will of Jesus. You notice how he frames this question, or his statement. He says, Lord, if you will. If you will. He recognizes this is a matter of mercy, right? He can't just come and tell Jesus, hey, fix me. That's your mercy. If you will, you can make me clean. In verse 13, what does it say Jesus does? Immediately. He reaches out his hand and he touches Jesus and he says, I will. Be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. I want to pause for just a second. What does this teach us about Jesus? What do we learn about Jesus from this very simple interaction with this man who has leprosy? Jesus loved this man. And not only did he love him, his compassion and his love extended beyond just the feelings he had for this man, right? Jesus could have just said, I will be clean, and not touched the man, right? He could have just said, yeah, I got the power, be healed. But Jesus intentionally touches this man to show him, I see you, I care about you, and I'm greater. So his compassion extends beyond just his feelings. What else do we see? What else do we learn about Jesus from this interaction? Yeah, Jess.
I think his question is, if you will, you can make me clean. I think it's really interesting. He doesn't say, can you heal me? He says, can you make me clean? And you're right, the priest was the only one could eventually declare somebody clean.
That's right.
And so I think it kind of parallels with Peter when he says, I'm a sinful man, depart from me. I think Luke is trying to present this idea that Jesus, he's not intimidated by sin. He's not intimidated by leprosy. Leprosy to them was like a representation of death, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you couldn't enter the tabernacle when you had like this non-life on you. And Jesus, he touches him. Like, he was a social outcast. Nobody would touch this man, but Jesus reaches out and touches him. He's not intimidated by death. In fact, he's come to conquer it.
Yeah, I appreciate that word that you used. Jesus is not intimidated. You notice every time Jesus is confronted with some sort of malady, issue, problem, whatever it is, he doesn't sit there and go, man, how am I going to do this? Or he doesn't have to pause to figure it out. It doesn't faze him. And I think something else very important that you're drawing out is someone that had leprosy, if another person were to touch them, they also would become unclean. They also would become unclean. So Jesus not only touching him, but cleansing him of that. What does that demonstrate about Jesus? There's a greater power at work here, right? Because the thing that is the most powerful is what's going to win in this situation, right? It's either the leprosy or it's Jesus. And he's showing, I'm not unclean from this. I actually create cleansing. I create life. And people need to see that about Jesus. Daniel?
I think that just adds to his credibility, the fact that he actually touched him. And, you know, there's a lot of risk for the man with leprosy to come to Jesus.
That's right.
Because, you know, anybody found out, you know, that's it for him, basically. But also lots of risk for Jesus to touch the man and interact with them, but it shows here. I guess the other point, it's escaping me right now. Well, I'll come back to it.
Okay, no problem. John, you want to follow up on that?
Well, it doesn't say to us that, you know, when someone's full of leprosy, it would probably be obvious, like has already been said, you know, there's probably digits missing or, you know, something on your skin that's visible. It doesn't say that he was restored, although we kind of imply, I mean, it implies that because how else would other people then know that he's been cleansed of his leprosy if there wasn't some kind of visible outward appearance change or whatever? I mean, just announcing that he's cleansed probably wouldn't be enough for the Pharisees or whoever would happen to be observing this, but you know.
It does say here immediately the leprosy left him, so there's something.
Leprosy left him, but I mean, when I was reading this, I thought, well, you know, if he had lost fingers, were they still missing?
Sure.
Or was he restored back to prior to having leprosy?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure we know how to answer that, but obviously it changed him enough to the place where he was able to be pronounced cleansed by this. And obviously verse number 15, the report goes about, I mean, people are astonished by whatever it was that Jesus did. It changed him. It changed him completely.
And he had to go to the priest for verification.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's an important detail that we can't overlook here. You know, it's interesting. Jesus cleanses this man, but he still tells him, hey, go do what the law told you to do. Jesus is not separating himself from honoring God and doing things God's way. In fact, they're still operating under this old covenant, right? Jesus is not just rebelling against what the old covenant was. He's saying, do what the law said, because that honors God and because God has told you to do this. And I think that's an important point we need to continue to make throughout Jesus' ministries. He continually affirmed, if God said it, you need to do it. Go show yourself to the priest according to what God said. Offer the sacrifice according to what God had said. It's always important to honor God to Jesus. It's always important to honor God and keep his word. You find your thought?
Came back.
All right.
Yeah, so I just really appreciate how little is really recorded for us here. He just says 4 words to leper.
That's right.
He reaches out, it's clean. I think, and I'm reading into it a little bit, Jesus, he really appreciates how desperate this person is, knowing there's only one thing that can cure me. There's only one person, and it's you. I'm coming to you knowing this. And I think it's a great lesson for us because leprosy is a lot like sin.
That's right.
It infects us. Leprosy is a disease that gets all the way down to the bones sometimes. And I mean, that's how sin works too. And so for us, the lesson is we have to understand how desperate we really are. And we have to understand that the one solution is Jesus. And maybe he'll just tell us, seeing that, I will clean you. I will do it.
You know, coupling that with what Jessica said just a minute ago, I think it's just so important. Having that Peter moment, right? Because Peter had the same realization as this leper in truth, right? There's something profoundly different about Jesus, that he can change me, but he's powerful, and I need to be very cognizant of that. And I just wonder if we have those moments where we have that realization about the desperation of sin and the sufficiency of Jesus. You know, we often talk about that in trite terms, but The truth is, we're desperate without Jesus. Only He can cleanse us. Only He can do something about our infirmities. Jessica, did you have a follow-up comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think another application is, I've sat with so many people that they think that their sin is too great or their past is too much for God, and God can't possibly forgive them or whatever. And I mean, I think Peter and this man are a testament to God. God's not intimidated by your sin. God's come to deal with your sin, and He loves you.
That's exactly right. Jesus came to take away the sins of the people, to deal with sin directly head on. It's because sin exists that Jesus came. That's such a great point to remember. Nick?
Over in Matthew 12, it says that the people were looking for a sign. They wanted a sign. And here, Jesus lays out a sign, and the multitudes received that. They got that message loud and clear. But then over in chapter 6, it says that the church leaders were in a rage. That contrast of seeking a sign, of seeing a sign, and there's no other explanation for it. And then the church leaders, that phrase just really caught me, that they were in a rage because He had the temerity to heal this man.
Yeah. There's something about the heart and being honest with Jesus that's so critical here, because even these people who sat right in front of Jesus and saw these things happen, they came to wrong conclusions, even ugly conclusions about Jesus because of all of this. Now, just for the sake of time, I just want to point out one more thing here in chapter 5. We'll have a lot to make up on Wednesday, but I'm sure we can do it. It'll be fine. So after He heals this guy, these reports are going abroad about Him, right? That's something that Luke really emphasizes. People are talking about Jesus. People are flocking to Jesus. People want to see, they want to hear Him talk, they want to see Him heal these infirmities. But notice verse number 16. In the midst of all of this, what does Jesus do? Verse 16.
It's at a desolate place to pray.
Yeah, He runs away from the crowds. Why is Jesus doing that? I don't know about you. If I'm here to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom and the people are coming, what a great opportunity. But yet Jesus said, I need to go over here by myself and I need to pray. I need to get away. In fact, Peter would come looking for him and say, where are you? Everybody's looking for you. Why does Jesus go off by Himself to pray to these desolate places?
He needs to recharge.
Doesn't want a reputation of just a healer.
Yeah, a lot of it is what He's trying to help communicate here. I didn't just come here to heal every single disease in the world. I came to deal with something much greater. But I think it's also important. Jesus wasn't concerned with the fame. Right? He already knew who He was. Right? He's the Son of God. He doesn't have to prove that to anybody. All He's doing, it's really fascinating. We really need to ponder on this. He's demonstrating who He is. He's not trying to prove who He is. Does that make sense? And I understand that's a little nuanced, but I really saw this when He was interacting with Satan. You got this voice from heaven when He's baptized that says, "You are my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased." And then Satan shows up and says, "Well, if you are the Son of God, do ... And Jesus is like, I don't have to prove anything to you. I know who I am, and I am connected and intimately aligned with the Father so much that I don't have to prove that to anybody. And as He's going about and He's demonstrating who He is, He's not trying to prove this to anybody. He's not trying to prove I'm the Son of God. He's just saying, this is who I am inherently. And getting away and avoiding the spotlight, I think, really emphasizes that. He didn't need all of that for Him to be who He was. What He needed was connection with God. And so He would get away from all of this stuff because the most important thing to Jesus was a connection to His Father. Because that's what He was trying to create for everyone else that would follow Him, a connection to His Father. And if He's not connected to His Father, we can't be connected to the Father. And as John would say, no one comes to the Father except through me, Jesus would say. And so He would get off to these desolate places. And Luke uses that phrase several times. So as Jesus gets completely away from everything, to show us how important it is to be connected with God. And if I can just make a little sidebar application as we end this morning. If Jesus can stop everything to go pray, even in the midst of all the busyness that he had, you can stop everything and go and pray, because that's the most important thing you can do, is be connected with the Father. All right, guys, we'll pick up right here. We'll start with the healing of the paralytic on Wednesday. Y'all gonna have to let me go a little bit faster next time, though. Thank you guys for your thoughts and comments.